You are nothing without me, Clara. Just a useless housewife clinging to my success." Those were the last words Ethan spat at her before tossing the divorce papers onto the mahogany desk. He thought he was cutting off dead weight. He thought he was finally free to build his empire with a woman who matched his ambition. But he made one fatal calculation error. He didn't realize that the empire he was so proud of was built on the foundation she laid. He didn't know that the board of directors answered to a shadow investor they called the architect. And he certainly never expected that when the boardroom doors opened for the vote to oust him, the entire room would stand up. Not for him, but for the useless ex-wife walking through the door. This is the story of the most brutal regret in corporate history. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, blurring the lights of New York City into a smear of grey and gold. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the storm. Ethan Caldwell stood by the window, swirling a glass of aged scotch. He didn't look at the woman sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa. He didn't need to. In his mind, she was already part of his past, a blurred figure in the rear-view mirror of his accelerating life. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple beige cardigan that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a loose, practical bun. She looked nothing like the glittering socialites Ethan had been photographed with lately. She looked like a wife, a tired, supportive, invisible wife. "It's done then?" Clara asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremors rattling her ribcage. Ethan turned, his tailored suit shifting perfectly with his movement. He was handsome, undeniably so, with the kind of sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes that magazines loved to feature. But tonight, his face was twisted in a look of pity that felt sharper than hate. "The papers are in front of you, Clara," Ethan said, taking a sip of his drink. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The settlement is generous, more than you'd ever make in 10 lifetimes with that little bakery hobby of yours." Clara looked down at the document. Dissolution of marriage. The bold letters seemed to mock the last 7 years of her life. 7 years of ironing his shirts, proofreading his pitch decks at 3 a.m., and holding his hand through the panic attacks when the company was nearly bankrupt. "You're ending 7 years because you're bored, Ethan?" "I'm ending it because we've evolved in different directions," he corrected sharply, walking over to the desk. "Look at me, Clara. I'm the CEO of Caldwell Tech. We just secured the merger with Orion Systems. I'm on the cover of Forbes next month." He gestured vaguely at her. "And you're still exactly where you were when we met. You're stagnant. You don't fit in my world anymore. I need a partner who understands power, who can walk into a room and command attention. Not someone who worries about whether the pot roast is burning." The cruelty hung in the air. Clara didn't flinch. She had seen this coming for months. The late nights, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he stopped wearing the watch she bought him for their 5th anniversary, a watch she had sold her grandmother's jewelry to afford, back when they had nothing. "Is this about Jessica?" Clara asked softly. Ethan froze. The glass halted halfway to his mouth. "Who told you about Jessica?" "I'm a housewife, Ethan. I'm not blind," Clara said, finally looking up to meet his eyes. "Jessica Thorne, your new chief marketing officer, the one who understands your vision." Ethan slammed the glass down, the liquid splashing onto the polished wood. "She understands the business, Clara. She brings value to the table. She challenges me." "What do you bring? Emotional support? Warm meals? I can hire a maid and a therapist for that. I need a power couple image. You're just useless in this phase of my life." Useless. The word echoed in Clara's mind, triggering a memory from 5 years ago. It was 2 a.m. in their cramped studio apartment. Ethan was sobbing on the floor, surrounded by rejection letters from investors. "I can't do it, Clara. I'm a failure. No one believes in the algorithm." She had knelt beside him, holding his face. "I believe in it. I believe in you. I'll take the night shift at the diner. I'll sell the car. We will make this work." She had been his backbone. Now he called her useless because she remained the foundation, while he became the skyscraper. "Sign the papers, Clara," Ethan said, his voice cold again. "Jessica is moving in on Monday. I want this cleared up before the quarterly board meeting next week. I don't want any baggage dragging down the stock price." Clara picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. She could fight him. She could drag this out in court. She knew where the bodies were buried, financially speaking. She knew about the offshore accounts in the Caymans he set up to dodge taxes last year. She knew about the bribe he paid to the zoning commissioner for the new headquarters. But she looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he wasn't worth the fight. Not the way he thought, anyway. "You really think you built this alone, don't you?" she whispered. Ethan laughed, a dry, arrogant sound. "I did the work, Clara. I took the meetings. I closed the deals. You kept the house clean. Don't confuse support with leadership." Clara signed her name. The ink was black and final. She stood up, leaving the papers on the desk. She didn't ask for the apartment. She didn't ask for alimony. She didn't even take the check he had prepared as a generous settlement. "Keep the money, Ethan," Clara said, walking toward the door. "You're going to need it." Ethan scoffed. "Is that a threat? From you? What are you going to do? Bake me a poisoned muffin?" Clara stopped at the door. She turned, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, calculating indifference of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. "I'm not going to do anything, Ethan," she said calmly. "I'm just going to let you be the CEO you think you are. Let's see how long Caldwell Tech lasts without its useless baggage." She closed the door behind her. Ethan stared at the empty space, a flicker of unease twisting in his gut. But he quickly shook it off. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Jessica, it's done. She's gone." "Yeah. Signed without a fight. I told you she didn't have the spine for a battle. We're free." Outside, Clara stepped into the pouring rain. She didn't hail a cab. Instead, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb the moment she exited the building. A driver in a sharp suit stepped out, holding an umbrella to shield her. "Good evening, Ms. Sterling," the driver said, using her maiden name, a name Ethan hadn't heard in years, a name that carried weight in circles Ethan could only dream of entering. "Good evening, Arthur," Clara replied, sliding into the leather back seat. "Where to, Mom?" Clara pulled out her phone. She had one unread message from a contact listed simply as the chairman. Message: "The board is uneasy about the merger. They are asking for the architect's opinion. Are you ready to step out of the shadows?" Clara typed a quick reply. "Set the meeting. It's time." She looked out the window at the penthouse looming above, a single light burning where Ethan was likely celebrating his freedom. "Take me to the headquarters," Clara said, her voice dropping the soft, submissive tone she had used for 7 years. "I have a board meeting to prepare for." 3 weeks had passed since the divorce was finalized. To the outside world, Ethan Caldwell was winning. His face was plastered on billboards in Times Square, advertising the new Caldwell AI integration. He attended galas with Jessica Thorne on his arm, a vision in crimson silk who spoke fluent corporate buzzwords and charmed investors with practiced smiles. But inside the Caldwell Tech headquarters, The air was growing thin. "What do you mean the server load is at 98%? Ethan barked, slamming his hand onto the conference table. "We haven't even launched the public beta yet." David, the chief technology officer, wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked exhausted. "It's the optimization script, Ethan. The data packets are getting bottlenecked at the entry node. It's creating a feedback loop." "So fix it," Jessica interjected, looking up from her phone where she was monitoring social media engagement. "We have the launch party on Friday. The press is expecting a revolution, not a loading screen. Just rewrite the code." David looked at Jessica with barely concealed disdain, then turned back to Ethan. "It's not that simple. The architecture is complex. Look, for the last 5 years, whenever we had these bottlenecks, the patch was applied remotely overnight. We assumed you were doing it." Ethan frowned. "Me? I haven't touched the raw code since 2019. I handle strategy." "Well, someone was logging in with the admin root access Ghost Ober 1 and rerouting the traffic," David insisted. "We all thought it was your secret handle. Since the divorce, since 3 weeks ago. Ghost SO1 hasn't logged in once. The system is deteriorating, Ethan. It's like the immune system of the software just vanished." Ethan felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. Ghost SO1. He remembered a night 2 years ago. He had woken up at 4 a.m. to find Clara in the living room, her laptop casting a blue glow on her face. When he asked what she was doing, she had quickly closed the lid and smiled tiredly. "Just playing Sudoku. Go back to sleep, honey." Clara. No, impossible. She was a baker. She read romance novels. She didn't know Python or C++. "I'll handle it," Ethan snapped, dismissing the thought. "It's probably just a legacy script glitching out. Jessica, focus on the PR. If the tech stumbles, we need the narrative to be strong enough to carry us over the bumps." Jessica smiled, sharp and predatory. "Don't worry, darling. I've already leaked a rumor that the delay is due to unprecedented demand. The stock actually went up 2 points. Perception is reality." Ethan nodded, but the unease didn't leave him. Later that night, back at the penthouse, the silence was deafening. With Clara, the house had always smelled like vanilla or rosemary. There was always soft jazz playing. Now it smelled of expensive cleaning products and Jessica's overpowering perfume. Jessica was in the bedroom on a call, laughing loudly. Ethan sat in his study, staring at the login logs David had sent him. "User, Ghost Tour 1. Last login, 22 days ago. Activity, optimization of kernel, 4.2. Patch applied, 22 days ago, the night before he asked for the divorce. He opened the drawer where Clara used to keep her household files. It was empty, except for a single, forgotten notebook, slid to the very back. He pulled it out. It was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook. He opened the first page. He expected grocery lists or cookie recipes. Instead, he found algorithms, pages and pages of complex, handwritten code structure. Notes in the margins, written in Clara's loopy handwriting. "Ethan's memory allocation is sloppy here. Will cause crash at 10K users. Fixed it using a sharding protocol." Another page. "He's too stressed about the Orion deal. I reviewed the contract. Clause 4B is a trap. I'll send an anonymous tip to legal to have them flag it." Ethan's hands shook. He flipped through the years. Every major success, every crisis averted, every lucky break Caldwell Tech had experienced in the last 7 years was documented here. She hadn't just supported him emotionally. She had been quietly, invisibly fixing his mistakes. "What you reading?" Ethan jumped. Jessica was leaning against the doorframe, holding a glass of wine. "Nothing," Ethan said, shoving the notebook into his briefcase. He couldn't tell her. If Jessica knew the genius CEO was actually propped up by the wife he just discarded, she would lose respect for him. And Jessica only loved power. "Come to bed," Jessica purred. "We have a big day tomorrow. The board wants to discuss the quarterly projections." "The board," Ethan muttered. "Right." "They're eating out of your hand, Ethan," she assured him. "Except for that one old guy. Henderson. He keeps asking about the architect. Who is that, anyway? Is it a code name for a new project?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, the fear tightening his chest. "But I have a feeling we're about to find out." The crisis hit on a Tuesday. It started with a whistle. Not a literal one, but a digital whistle blown by a short seller report released at 9:08 a.m. sharp. The report was titled Caldwell Tech, a house of cards without a foundation. The report detailed security flaws in the new software, flaws that Ghost 01 used to patch manually, but were now wide open. User data was vulnerable. The encryption was outdated. By 10:00 a.m., the stock had plummeted 15%. By 11:00 a.m., the Orion Systems merger team called to pause negotiations. Ethan was in his office, shouting into two phones at once. "It's a hit piece. It's slander," he yelled at his PR team. "Get a statement out. Deny everything." "We can't deny it, sir," the legal counsel said, her voice trembling on the speakerphone. "The data in the report, it's accurate. Someone with deep access to our source code leaked the vulnerabilities. They know exactly where the holes are." "Who?" Ethan roared. "Who has that access?" The door to his office opened without a knock. It wasn't Jessica. It was William Henderson, the chairman of the board. A man of few words and immense influence, Henderson usually only appeared for the annual vote. Today he looked grim. "Mr. Henderson," Ethan said, hanging up the phones. "I can explain. It's a temporary setback. I have a team working on a patch right now." Henderson didn't sit. He stood by the door, leaning on his cane. "This isn't a setback, Ethan. It's a collapse. The board has lost confidence." "Because of one bad morning," Ethan scoffed, trying to regain his bravado. "I built this company from a garage. I am Caldwell Tech." "You are the face of Caldwell Tech," Henderson corrected quietly. "But you are not the money, and you are certainly not the brains, it seems." Ethan stiffened. "Excuse me?" "We received a communication from the architect this morning," Henderson said. "Our primary shadow investor, the one who bailed us out 3 years ago when you overextended on the VR project, the one who holds 40% of the preferred voting stock through a shell corporation." "I thought you were the shadow investor," Ethan said, stunned. He had never met the architect. He just cashed the checks that kept his company afloat, assuming it was a consortium of banks. "No," Henderson said. "I am merely the proxy. The architect is displeased with the new management direction, specifically the removal of key legacy assets." "What assets?" Ethan asked, confused. "I only fired the redundant marketing team and my wife." Henderson's eyes flashed with something unreadable. "The architect has called for an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. On what grounds? On the grounds of gross incompetence and breach of fiduciary duty," Henderson said. "If you cannot fix the code by tomorrow morning, Ethan, the board will move to remove you as CEO." Henderson turned to leave. "Wait!" Ethan stepped forward. "Who is it? Who is the architect? I have a right to face my accuser." Henderson paused. "You will face them tomorrow. I suggest you prepare, Ethan. And perhaps check your ego at the door. It won't help you in that room." When Henderson left, Jessica stormed in. She looked frantic. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled. "My contacts are saying the stock is going to be delisted if we don't stabilize the server," she screamed. "Fix it, Ethan. Do your genius thing. Type the code." Ethan stared at his computer screen. The lines of code looked like gibberish. He realized, with a sinking horror, that he hadn't actually solved a complex engineering problem in years. He had just come up with ideas, and somehow, by the next morning, the code worked. He had thought it was his subconscious brilliance. He had thought he was sleepwalking. He opened the drawer and pulled out the spiral notebook again. He stared at Clara's handwriting. If the server load exceeds 90%, the kill switch is hidden in line 4004. Password: Blue Jay. Blue Jay. The name of the bird they saved together on their first date. Ethan typed in the command. Access denied. Credentials expired. The screen flashed red. A message appeared in the terminal window. System message: Administrator Ghost-01 has revoked all legacy privileges. Manual override required by Level 5 clearance. There was only one person with Level 5 clearance aside from him, and he had just divorced her. Jessica, Ethan said, his voice hollow. Get out. What? Get out of my office. I need to think. You need me, she shrieked. I'm the only one spinning this to the press. You're the one who told me to ignore the back end. Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. Get out! Jessica fled. Ethan was alone with the red blinking light of his failure. He picked up his phone. He dialed Clara's number. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Clara. I'm probably baking or reading. Leave a message. Her voice sounded so warm, so safe. Clara, Ethan said to the recording, his voice breaking. It's me. I know about the notebook. I know about Ghost-01. Look, we need to talk. The company is in trouble. My company is in trouble. Call me back. He hung up. He waited. 1 minute later, his phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a text from an unknown number. Your company. It was never just yours. See you at the board meeting. The architect. Ethan dropped the phone. The screen cracked against the floor. The boardroom of Caldwell Tech was a fortress of glass and steel, located on the 50th floor, overlooking the city that Ethan felt was slipping from his grasp. The atmosphere was funeral. The 12 members of the board sat around the long oval table, their faces grim. Jessica sat next to Ethan, tapping her heel nervously against the floor. She had tried to hold his hand earlier, but he had pulled away. This is ridiculous, Jessica whispered. We have the controlling shares. Between your 30% and my options, we have the leverage. We can outvote them. Ethan didn't answer. He felt like a man walking to the gallows. He kept looking at the empty chair at the head of the table. The chairman's seat was occupied by Henderson, but the seat reserved for the majority investor was empty. Let us begin, Henderson said, checking his watch. The agenda is simple, a motion of no confidence in the current CEO, Ethan Caldwell. I object, Jessica stood up. Ethan is the founder. You can't oust him based on a technical glitch that is already being resolved. It is not resolved, a board member named Margaret noted, looking at her tablet. The system is currently offline globally. Our stock is down 40% since Tuesday. We are bleeding millions by the hour. And whose fault is that? Jessica pointed a manicured finger at the board. You're the ones panicking. Ethan has a plan. Ethan doesn't have a plan, Henderson said calmly. Ethan has a notebook. Ethan froze. Henderson knew. The architect provided us with documentation, Henderson continued. Logs dating back 7 years. Proving that 85% of the patent-pending code attributed to Ethan Caldwell was actually written by a third party. A third party who was not on the payroll. A third party who was recently removed from the CEO's life. The room went silent. That's a lie, Jessica hissed. Who is this architect? Why are they hiding? I'm not hiding, a voice came from the double doors. The heavy oak doors swung open. Ethan turned, expecting to see a corporate raider in a suit, maybe a rival CEO like Marcus from Orion Systems. Instead, the room went still. Walking through the doors was a woman wearing a white tailored power suit that cost more than Ethan's car. Her hair, usually in a messy bun, was blown out in sleek, chestnut waves. She wore stiletto heels that clicked with a rhythm of absolute authority against the marble floor. She walked with her head high, her eyes sharp and cold. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at Ethan. She looked straight at the empty chair at the head of the table. "Clara," Ethan breathed, the word escaping him like a dying gasp. Jessica let out a choked laugh. "Clara, the baker. What is she doing here? Did she bring snacks?" Clara ignored her. She walked past Ethan, the scent of expensive perfume, not vanilla, trailing behind her. She reached the head of the table. Mr. Henderson stood up immediately. The other board members followed suit, standing in a sign of absolute respect. "Gentlemen, ladies," Clara said, her voice smooth and commanding. She placed a slim leather folder on the table. "Clara, you can't be in here," Ethan stammered, standing up. "This is a closed session for shareholders only." Clara finally turned her gaze to him. It was the look of a stranger. "I know the rules, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "I wrote them." She turned to Henderson. "Chairman, please read the share distribution." Henderson cleared his throat. "As of this morning, the Shell Corporation, Sterling Ventures, has revealed its primary beneficiary. Clara Sterling is the owner of 45% of Caldwell Tech's voting stock. Combined with the board's proxy votes, she controls the majority." "Sterling Ventures," Ethan whispered. "That's you." "My inheritance," Clara said simply. "My family didn't approve of you, Ethan. They thought you were a gold digger. So I hid the money. I hid the connections. I wanted to build something with you from the ground up. I wanted to be your partner, not your bank account." She leaned forward, her hands on the table. "I stayed up nights writing your code. I managed your back end. I funded your bailouts through shell companies so your ego wouldn't be bruised. I played the useless housewife because I thought you needed to feel like the hero." She paused, letting the silence crush him. "But then you called me useless. You said I didn't match your ambition." Clara smiled, and it was terrifying. "So I'm here to show you my ambition, Ethan. I'm taking my company back." "You can't!" Jessica screeched. "We have a contract." "Your contract," Clara said, not even looking at Jessica, "was contingent on the Orion merger. I killed the merger 10 minutes ago. Orion doesn't do business with companies that steal intellectual property. And since I own the copyright to the source code, registered under my maiden name 5 years ago, Ethan has been using stolen goods." Clara sat down in the head chair. She looked at the board. "I move to remove Ethan Caldwell as CEO, effective immediately, for incompetence and intellectual property theft. Do I have a second?" "Second," Henderson said instantly. "Second," Margaret said. "Second," the entire room chorused. Clara looked at Ethan. "The motion carries. Security will escort you out. Please leave your badge and company phone on the table." Ethan stood there, his world spinning. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had mocked, was sitting in the seat of power he had worshipped. "Clara, wait!" Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can talk about this. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But we were a team. We can be a team again." Clara opened the folder in front of her. She didn't look up. "You had a team, Ethan. You fired her." She gestured to the security guards waiting by the door. "Get him out of my boardroom." Security did not handle Ethan gently. The 2 guards, men he had nodded to distractedly every morning for 5 years, now held his arms with a firmness that bordered on disdain. They marched him past the glass-walled conference rooms, where his employees, stood watching. Some looked shocked. Others, the ones he had berated or ignored, looked vindicated. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent and suffocating. Jessica stood in the corner of the car, frantically typing on her phone. She hadn't looked at him since the vote. "Jessica," Ethan rasped, trying to straighten his jacket as the doors opened to the lobby. "Listen, it's a setback. We'll sue. Wrongful termination. I still have contacts. We can start over." The lobby was a zoo. Word had leaked. Reporters were pressed against the revolving doors, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Jessica finally looked up. Her eyes were dry, clear, and utterly void of warmth. "We?" she asked, arching a sculpted eyebrow. "There is no we, Ethan. I was the CMO of a billion-dollar tech unicorn. Now I'm the mistress of a disgraced fraud. Do you know what that does to my personal brand?" "I made you!" Ethan hissed, grabbing her arm as they stepped out of the elevator. "I gave you that title." Jessica shook him off with a look of disgust. "You gave me a title in a company run by your wife. You're radioactive, Ethan. I just got off the phone with headhunters. They won't touch anyone associated with the Caldwell fraud. I have to go into damage control." The guards pushed the revolving doors open. The humidity of the city hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Jessica, wait!" Ethan shouted as the flashbulbs blinded him. Jessica didn't wait. She walked straight past the reporters, holding her hand up. "No comment. I was deceived, just like the shareholders. I am cooperating fully with the investigation." She hailed a cab, slid inside, and vanished into the traffic without a backward glance. Ethan was left standing alone on the concrete. The reporters swarmed him. "Mr. Caldwell, is it true you didn't write the code? Ethan, did you knowingly defraud investors? How does it feel to be ousted by your ex-wife?" Ethan tried to push through them, but he had nowhere to go. His company car was gone. His driver, Arthur, answered to Clara now. He patted his pockets and realized he had left his wallet in his office drawer. He didn't even have the cash for a subway ticket. He looked up at the towering glass skyscraper of Caldwell Tech. It pierced the clouds, a monument to ambition. On the 50th floor, through the tinted glass of the boardroom balcony, he saw a silhouette. Clara stood there, looking down. She held a glass of champagne. She didn't wave. She didn't gloat. She simply watched him the way a scientist watches a specimen under a microscope, detached, observant, and finished. Ethan felt a vibration in his pocket. It was his personal phone, the only thing they let him keep. A notification from his bank popped up. Alert, assets frozen. Court order. 4492 Sesh Bebi, pending investigation into fraud. The rain began to fall again, mixing with the sweat on his forehead. Ethan Caldwell, the tech king of New York, pulled his suit jacket over his head and began the long, humiliating walk to the nearest subway station, realizing for the first time that he didn't actually know which train went to his parents' house in Queens. 6 months later, the world had moved on. The news cycle was brutal and fast. The Caldwell scandal was old news, replaced by the sterling Renaissance. Ethan sat in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Jersey City. The walls were thin, and the smell of someone cooking cabbage permeated the hallway. His expensive suits hung in the closet, gathering dust. He couldn't sell them. They were evidence in the ongoing SEC investigation. He sat at a folding table, a cheap laptop humming in front of him. "Come on," he muttered, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Focus." He was trying to code. He had convinced a small angel investor, a guy who didn't read the news much, to give him seed money for a new app. It was a simple idea, an AI-driven scheduling assistant. But the code wouldn't work. Every time he tried to build the core architecture, he hit a wall. He would type out a structure, stare at it, and realize it was clumsy, bloated, and inefficient. For years he had operated under the delusion that he was a genius who just needed inspiration. He realized now that his inspiration had been Clara fixing his mess while he slept. He opened a browser tab and typed Caldwell Tech Stock. The graph was a steep, beautiful green line climbing upward. Under Clara's leadership, the company had pivoted. They weren't just selling software anymore. They were revolutionizing medical data security. The headline on TechCrunch read, Clara Sterling, the quiet genius who saved an empire. Ethan clicked on a video interview attached to the article. Clara was sitting on a stage, wearing a navy blazer and jeans. She looked relaxed, younger even. The interviewer asked, Ms. Sterling, for years you stayed in the background. Why? Clara smiled. I thought love was a partnership. I thought if I lifted him up, we would both stand tall. I didn't realize that some people, when lifted, only use the height to look down on those holding the ladder. Ethan slammed the laptop shut. The truth stung more than the poverty. His phone rang. It was the angel investor. Ethan, look, I'm pulling the funding, the man said abruptly. What? Why? I'm almost done with the prototype. Ethan lied. I had my nephew look at the code repository you sent over. He said it's amateur. He said it looks like something a first-year student wrote. And I heard about the lawsuit. I can't be involved with you, man. Don't call me again. The line went dead. Ethan put his head in his hands. The silence of the apartment was heavy. He looked around at the empty pizza boxes and the pile of unpaid legal bills. He missed the money, yes. But mostly, he missed the safety. He missed the feeling of invincibility he had when Clara was beside him. He missed the way she would rub his shoulders after a hard day and say, We'll figure it out. She never said, I'll figure it out. She always said, we. Even when she did all the work, desperation clawed at his throat. He needed to see her, not to beg for money, though he needed it, but to hear her voice. He needed her to tell him he wasn't useless. He grabbed his coat. He knew where she would be tonight, the annual Innovators Ball at the Met. It was the biggest night of the year. He used to host it. Now he would have to sneak in. The rain in New York City didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Ethan Caldwell stood across the street from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, shivering in the doorway of a closed bodega. The Innovators Ball was in full swing. It was the night of nights, the Oscars of the East Coast, a gala he had co-chaired just 12 months ago. Now he was watching it from the gutter. He adjusted the collar of his tuxedo. It was the only one the asset seizure team hadn't taken, mostly because it had been at the dry cleaners when the feds raided his penthouse. It was slightly damp now, and the patent leather shoes were pinching his toes, a cruel reminder of the comfort he had traded for arrogance. His stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. The angel investor's rejection had been the final nail in the coffin of his finances. His bank accounts were frozen blocks of ice. His credit cards were useless plastic shards. He had $58 in his pocket, the sum total of his life's worth. Move along, buddy, a beat cop said, tapping his baton against his leg as he walked past the bodega. You can't loiter here. VIPs are arriving. I'm on the list, Ethan muttered, a reflex from a life that no longer existed. The cop laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Yeah, and I'm the King of England. Move. Ethan moved. He crossed the street, dodging the black SUVs and limousines that idled like sharks in the water. He knew the layout of the Met better than he knew the layout of his own soul. He knew the service entrance on 80th Street. He knew that at 8 p.m. the catering staff would be in a chaotic shift change. He slipped through the shadows, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He wasn't just hungry for food, he was starving for redemption. He had convinced himself, in the lonely, silent hours of the night in his Jersey City efficiency, that Clara was the key. Not just to his money, but to his sanity. She was the only one who had ever known him, the real him, before the magazines and the billions. If he could just talk to her, away from the lawyers and the board members, he could fix this. He could charm her. He was Ethan Caldwell. He could sell ice to a polar bear. Surely he could sell his repentance to the woman who had vowed to love him forever. He found a catering van with its back doors open. A distracted waiter was smoking a cigarette nearby. Ethan spotted a spare apron and a tray of empty champagne flutes on a stack of crates. He acted on instinct. He tossed his $50 bill, his last lifeline, at the waiter's feet. "Dropped something?" Ethan muttered. As the waiter looked down, confused, Ethan grabbed the apron and the tray, slipping through the service doors before anyone could stop him. Inside, the museum was a sensory overload. The smell of expensive floral arrangements, white lilies and orchids, clashed with the scent of truffle oil and roasted duck. The air was warm and hummed with the sound of a string quartet playing a modernized version of Vivaldi. Ethan tied the apron over his tuxedo. It was a flimsy disguise, but it worked. In this world, the wealthy were trained to look through the help, not at them. He was invisible. He navigated the corridors, holding the tray like a shield, until he emerged into the great hall. It was breathtaking. The Temple of Dendur was bathed in soft, amber light, reflecting off the pool of water. The room was filled with the titans of industry, the celebrities, the people Ethan used to call peers. He saw Marcus from Orion Systems laughing with the mayor. He saw Jessica Thorne, looking frantic and desperate near the bar, trying to corner a hedge fund manager who was clearly ignoring her. Ethan felt a pang of satisfaction at her misery, but it was fleeting. He didn't care about Jessica. She was a symptom of his disease. He was looking for the cure. And then he saw her. Clara stood near the center of the room, but she wasn't just standing. She was holding court. She looked nothing like the woman he had divorced. That woman had worn beige cardigans and sensible shoes. That woman had hunched her shoulders, trying to take up less space. This woman was a celestial event. Clara wore a gown of liquid silver that clung to her figure before cascading to the floor like a waterfall of mercury. Her shoulders were bare, her skin glowing under the museum lights. Her hair, usually messy, was styled in sleek, vintage Hollywood waves. But it wasn't the dress or the hair that stopped Ethan's breath. It was her posture. She stood with a terrifying stillness, a quiet confidence that drew people in like gravity. She was speaking, and a circle of 6 powerful men who had once dismissed Ethan as a lucky upstart, were leaning in, hanging on her every word. Beside her stood Daniel Thorne. Ethan knew Daniel. He was old money, the kind of man who didn't need to shout to be heard. Daniel was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and he was looking at Clara not like a prize to be won, but like a masterpiece he was lucky to witness. He held a glass of water for her, waiting for a break in the conversation, attentive but not overbearing. Jealousy, hot and acidic, rose in Ethan's throat. That should be him. He should be the one standing next to the Queen of Tech. He took a deep breath. Showtime. He moved through the crowd. He didn't offer drinks to anyone. He walked with purpose, his eyes locked on Clara. As he got closer, the sounds of the party seemed to fade, leaving only the rushing blood in his ears. He reached the edge of her circle. The encryption protocols are actually based on a biomimicry algorithm, Clara was saying, her voice clear and melodic. We looked at how viral structures replicate and inverted the logic to create a self-healing firewall. Brilliant, the CEO of a major bank murmured. Absolutely brilliant, Clara. Clara, Ethan said. His voice was a rasp, rough from disuse and nerves. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the polite conversation like a serrated knife. The circle broke. The men turned, annoyed at the interruption by a waiter. Clara turned slowly. Her eyes met his. There was no spark of recognition at first, just a polite, distant inquiry. Then, the recognition landed. It didn't bring a smile, nor a frown. Her face remained a perfect, unreadable mask of marble. Ethan, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. The name rippled through the group. The bankers and CEOs took a collective half-step back, as if Ethan were contagious. They knew who he was. The fraud. The failure. The man who lost it all. "You're serving drinks?" Marcus from Orion asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. Ethan ignored him. He stripped off the apron and let it fall to the floor, the tray clattering loudly. The sound echoed in the vast hall, silencing the nearby conversations. "I needed to see you," Ethan said, stepping closer to Clara. He tried to summon the old charm, the confident tilt of his head, but he just looked like a desperate man in a damp suit. "Security wouldn't let me in. I had to improvise. That's what we do, right?" "We improvise." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Clara and Ethan. His voice was low, dangerous. "I think you should leave, Ethan, before this gets embarrassing." "It's already embarrassing, Daniel," Ethan snapped, his eyes never leaving Clara. "But I don't care. I need to speak to my wife." "Ex-wife," Clara corrected. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that crushed the air out of his lungs. "Clara, please," Ethan pleaded, dropping the facade. His hands shook as he reached out, though he didn't dare touch her. "I know I messed up. I know I was arrogant. I got lost, okay? The money, the fame. It was like a drug. I forgot who built the supplier. I forgot it was you." The crowd was watching now. Phones were being raised. The live stream of his humiliation was beginning. "I'm ready to come back," Ethan continued, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I've learned my lesson. I'm humble now. I can learn the code, Clara. I can go back to school, or I can just be the husband you wanted. I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll support you. Let's just go back to how it was, just you and me against the world." He paused, breathing heavily, waiting for the softening in her eyes. Waiting for the Clara who used to cry when he had a cold, the Clara who sold her jewelry to buy him a watch. Clara looked at him. She looked at his frayed cuffs. She looked at the desperation etched into the lines around his mouth. She took a step forward, bypassing Daniel's protective arm. She stood toe-to-toe with him. "You want to go back to how it was?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan breathed. "Yes. We were a team." Clara shook her head slowly. A sad, almost pitying smile touched her lips. "We weren't a team, Ethan. I was your foundation. You were the structure. And for 7 years, I held you up while you added more and more weight, never once checking if the ground underneath you was cracking." "I can change," Ethan whispered. "I know you can't," she said simply, "because even now, standing here in a stolen apron, begging for a second chance, you're making this about your redemption, your lesson, your return." She gestured to the room around them, to the banners with the Sterling Tech logo, to the people who respected her, to the life she had built from the ashes of their marriage. "You said I didn't match your ambition, Ethan. Do you remember that night?" Ethan flinched. I didn't mean it. I was angry. You meant it, Clara said. And you were right. The crowd gasped softly. Ethan looked confused. What? Clara's gaze hardened. The warmth vanished, replaced by the cold brilliance of the CEO she had become. I didn't match your ambition, she repeated, her voice projecting clearly across the silent hall. Because my ambition was to build something lasting. Yours was just to be seen building it. She took a sip of water from the glass Daniel had been holding for her, then handed it back to him. The intimacy of the gesture, the silent synchronization between them, cut Ethan deeper than any shout could have. I ran the numbers, Ethan, Clara continued, delivering the final blow. I did a risk assessment on us, and I realized that to match your ambition, I would have to lower mine. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an evisceration. She hadn't just said no, she had redefined their entire history. She hadn't been the drag on his success, he had been the ceiling on hers. Ethan stood there, his mouth slightly open, no words coming out. The logic was irrefutable. Since she left him, she had soared. Since he lost her, he had sunk. The data proved her point. Clara, he choked out, tears finally spilling over. I have nothing. I am nothing without you. Clara looked at him one last time. The pity in her eyes was the worst part. It wasn't the anger of a lover scorned. It was the charity of a stranger passing a beggar. I know, she whispered. That's why I stayed so long. I knew you would crumble. But I finally realized, Ethan. It's not my job to be your scaffolding anymore. She turned her head slightly to the side. Arthur? The tall, broad-shouldered driver who used to drive Ethan to work stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. He was wearing the head of security earpiece now. Yes, Ms. Sterling? Mr. Caldwell has lost his way, Clara said, turning her back on Ethan. Please escort him out, and give him cab fare. It's raining, and he's not dressed for the weather. Clara, no, don't turn away, Ethan shouted, lunging forward. Daniel caught him. He didn't punch him. He didn't shove him. He just held him back with a firm, unyielding grip on his shoulder. Walk away, Ethan, Daniel said quietly. Have some dignity left. Arthur and two uniformed guards took Ethan by the arms. They didn't drag him, they guided him, which felt somehow more humiliating. He was being managed. He was a nuisance to be removed, like a spilled drink or a broken glass. As they marched him toward the exit, Ethan looked back over his shoulder. The circle had closed again. Clara was laughing at something the mayor said. Daniel was whispering in her ear, and she was leaning into him, looking radiant, powerful, and free. The heavy oak doors of the Met boomed shut behind him. Ethan found himself standing on the wet concrete of Fifth Avenue. The rain soaked through his thin tuxedo instantly. Arthur pressed a crisp $100 bill into his hand. Take care of yourself, Mr. Caldwell, Arthur said, not unkindly, before retreating back into the warmth of the gala. Ethan stood alone in the downpour. He looked at the money in his hand. Charity from the woman he had called useless. He looked at the reflection in the puddle at his feet. A wet, broken man, with nothing but a stolen apron in the gutter nearby. He realized then that the twist wasn't that she had taken everything from him. The twist was that he had given it all away, piece by piece, simply by refusing to see the value of what he held in his hands until it was gone. He hailed a taxi. Where to? The driver asked. Ethan hesitated. He didn't have a home. He didn't have a company. He didn't have a wife. Just drive, Ethan whispered, leaning his head against the cold glass. Drive until the money runs out. Ethan learned the hard way that arrogance is a loan you take out against your future, and eventually the bill comes due. He thought Clara was useless because she worked in the shadows, never realizing that shadows are created by the light of someone blocking the sun for you. In the end, Clara didn't need revenge. She just needed to stop carrying him. It's a powerful reminder. Never undervalue the people who supported you before the world applauded you. Because when they leave, they take the foundation with them. If you enjoyed this story of karmic justice and hidden power, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more stories to life. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder about loyalty, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.